We are so glad you're here with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today.
So, I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're walking through the streets of Paris,
Okay.
but it's the 1840s. It's a bustling, loud, totally chaotic city.
Right, very noisy.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But suddenly you notice something really strange. The entire city has essentially it's stopped functioning.
Like completely ground to a halt.
Yes. Shopkeepers are leaving their counters completely unattended. Factory workers are just refusing to clock in for their shifts.
Wow.
And the local cafes, which are normally deafening with arguments and clinking glasses, they are dead silent.
And why is that?
Because every single person is clustered around a newspaper. They are utterly paralyzed, just devouring the latest chapter of a serialized story.
And it wasn't just silence either. I mean, it escalated to actual chaos sometimes.
Oh, right, the riots.
Yeah, people were so deeply emotionally invested in this daily fiction that, well, when the author refused to bring a beloved character back to life, Parisians actually took to the streets.
They rioted over a book.
They gathered outside the newspaper office and rioted. They were literally protesting a plot point in a novel.
Which is it's wild to think about.
Yeah.
It is the absolute 19th century equivalent of breaking the internet.
Completely.
People losing their minds, abandoning their daily lives over a story. But here is where it gets really fascinating, and it's basically the core mission of our deep dive today.
Right.
We are looking at the classic novel, The Three Musketeers, and its legendary author, Alexandre Dumas. We are using excerpts and analysis from the text, The Sword and the Soul of Alexandre Dumas, as our primary source today.
It's a fantastic source for this.
It really is. But we aren't just talking about, sword fights and political intrigue. Our mission is to look at the man who caused this massive cultural hysteria, because the literary establishment of the time, they absolutely despised him.
Oh, they hated him. They called him a hack.
A hack, a fraud. They actively tried to erase him from the literary canon altogether.
And the supreme irony of that is that 180 years later, every single one of those elite critics is just, they're dust.
Yep.
Their names are completely forgotten by history. Meanwhile, the characters this outsider created are absolutely immortal.
They really are.
And that's because the story operates on two entirely different levels. On the surface, you have this pure adrenaline, swashbuckling adventure.
Right.
But beneath that, you have the meta-narrative of the author's own life. It is a profound, really heart-wrenching act of historical defiance.
Let's start with that author, actually, because you really cannot understand the power of this book without understanding the shadow hanging over the man who wrote it.
That's very true.
And that shadow belongs to his father. I mean, I knew Alexandre Dumas was a legendary figure, but I had no idea about the unbelievable life of General Thomas Alexandre Dumas.
His father's life reads like a total myth, but it's entirely true.
Tell us about him.
So, Thomas Alexandre Dumas was born in 1762 in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, which we now know as Haiti.
Right.
His father was a French nobleman, and his mother was an enslaved black woman named Marie Cessette Dumas.
Okay.
So he is a mixed-race man entering a highly stratified, deeply prejudiced world. But he travels to France, he joins the military, and he rises through the ranks during the French Revolution with blinding speed.
And he wasn't just like a strategist sitting in a tent giving orders, right?
Oh, no, absolutely not. He was a physical powerhouse. He was a giant of a man. His soldiers actually called him the Black Devil.
Which is an intense nickname.
It was a title of absolute terror from his enemies, but it was pure reverence from his men. He was also called the Horatius Cocles of the Tyrol.
Wait, Horatius Cocles, I might need a quick history refresher on that one. That sounds like a very specific classical reference.
Fair enough. So Horatius Cocles is this legendary figure from ancient Rome.
Okay.
The myth goes that he defended a vital bridge across the Tiber River against an entire invading army all by himself.
Wow.
Right. So applying that name to General Dumas was just about the highest military compliment you could possibly give in an era that was totally obsessed with antiquity.
And he actually earned it, didn't he?
He absolutely earned it.
Yeah.
There's a documented incident in the Alps where he literally held a narrow bridge against a charging Austrian regiment.
By himself.
He stood his ground alone, using his massive physical strength to fight them off until reinforcements could finally arrive. By the age of 31, he was a general. He was one of the highest-ranking men of African descent in European military history.
It's basically a superhero origin story. You have this towering, invincible figure fighting for the ideals of the Republic. But then, well, his trajectory collides with another rising star, doesn't it?
Yes. Napoleon Bonaparte.
And that does not go well.
It goes disastrously. Napoleon and General Dumas served together during the campaign in Egypt, and they clashed fundamentally.
And their ideologies.
Exactly. Dumas was a true believer in the Republic. He fought for liberty. Napoleon, on the other hand, was increasingly showing his dictatorial ambitions.
Right.
Dumas actually criticized Napoleon's vanity and his leadership right to his face. And Napoleon, who was incredibly petty and vindictive, he never forgave him.
So what did Napoleon actually do to him? Because he didn't just fire him, right?
No, he orchestrated his entire ruin. On his way back to France, General Dumas's ship was forced into an enemy port in Italy, and he was thrown into a dungeon.
Oh, man.
He was imprisoned for 2 years under conditions that were so horrific, malnutrition, suspected poisoning, total isolation, that it completely destroyed his immense physical health.
2 years in a dungeon will do that.
He went in a giant and came out half blind, deaf in one ear, and chronically ill.
Which is tragic enough on its own. But it's what happens after he gets back to France that really sets the stage for our deep dive.
Right.
He gets back, expecting the nation he literally bled for to recognize his sacrifice. And Napoleon just shuts the door on him.
Systematically. Napoleon denies him his military pension. He denies his family any financial support whatsoever.
Just cuts him off.
Completely.
Yeah.
And worse, Napoleon actively reinstates slavery in the French colonies and passes deeply racist laws in mainland France. General Dumas, this absolute hero of the Republic, is forced to live in poverty.
Sickening.
And when he dies in 1806, Napoleon refuses to even acknowledge his passing, let alone attend the funeral. He initiates a deliberate, focused campaign to ensure this mixed-race hero is entirely erased from the national memory.
And left behind in that deliberate erasure is his son. Alexandre Dumas is only 4 years old when his father dies.
4 years old?
Just imagine the psychological weight of that childhood. You are growing up in grinding poverty. You are watching your mother struggle just to put food on the table.
Yeah.
But every single night you are hearing these larger-than-life mythological stories of your father's heroics.
Yeah.
Yet when you walk out the door, the society you live in tells you that your father's legacy means absolutely nothing.
Solely because of his African heritage. That tension, that is the crucible that forged Alexandre Dumas. Because how do you process a trauma like that? How do you process a world that actively tries to delete your family?
Right.
For Dumas, the answer was ambition. He decided that if the empire was going to erase his father's history, he was simply going to write a new history.
I love that.
He was going to create heroes that were so vibrant, so undeniable, that the world could never, ever look away from them again.
So he moves to Paris. He's 20 years old. He barely has a penny to his name. And this brings us perfectly into the actual story of the Three Musketeers.
It really does.
Because it is impossible to miss the parallel between Dumas arriving in Paris and his protagonist, D'Artagnan, arriving in Paris.
It's a direct mirror. Let's look at D'Artagnan's entrance.
Let's do it.
We are in 17th century France, which is a deeply dangerous world of political factions and strict codes of honor. D'Artagnan arrives from the provinces, much like Dumas arrived from the country. And what does he bring with him? He brings a letter of introduction, an ego vastly larger than his empty purse, and this is my favorite detail, a violently yellow horse.
The yellow horse.
A horse that is so ugly, it literally makes people stop in the street and laugh at him.
I just love that detail. It's such a brilliant storytelling device because it instantly disarms you, right?
Exactly.
It establishes D'Artagnan as the ultimate underdog. You can't help but root for the kid who rides into the toughest city in the world on a horse that looks like a tragic lemon.
A tragic lemon, that's perfect.
But his pride is so sensitive. Within hours of arriving, he manages to insult the three deadliest, most elite warriors in the King's Guard.
Which is a masterclass in establishing character dynamics quickly.
Walk us through those encounters.
Sure. First, he bumps into Athos, who is aristocratic, melancholy, and nursing a secret wound. D'Artagnan essentially calls him out.
Okay.
Then he bumps into Porthos. Now, Porthos is massive, loud, and he's wearing this incredibly elaborate gold-embroidered sword belt just to show off.
Right, very vain.
D'Artagnan offends his vanity. And finally, he steps on a handkerchief belonging to Aramis, who is quiet, secretive, and really torn between his worldly desires and wanting to become a priest.
So just to recap, on his very first day in Paris, this teenager has scheduled 3 consecutive duels to the death.
Yep.
with 3 separate masters of the sword, all in the same afternoon, behind a monastery.
It's completely insane.
Most people would have just quietly snuck out of the city and gone back to the farm, but D'Artagnan just shows up and sharpens his blade.
But before they can actually kill this arrogant kid, the inciting incident happens. The Cardinal's guards arrive.
Ah, the rivals.
Right. Now, Cardinal Richelieu's guards and the King's Musketeers hate each other. They are bitter rival factions, and dueling is strictly illegal.
Right.
The guards outnumber them, and they fully intend to arrest them all.
And this is the moment the whole legend is born. D'Artagnan has every reason to step back. I mean, he's not a musketeer.
No, he's not.
And these 3 guys were literally just about to kill him.
Yeah.
But he doesn't hesitate. He draws his sword, and he throws his lot in with Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. He fights the guards. And suddenly, right there in the blood and the dust of that courtyard, enemies become brothers.
It establishes the core philosophy of the novel right there in the first act. Brotherhood isn't about bloodlines, and it isn't about class. It's about who stands beside you when the swords come out.
I want to pause on that idea of brotherhood for a second, because it brings us to the famous motto.
All for one, one for all.
Exactly. We've heard it a million times. It's on coffee mugs, it's on movie posters. But why did that specific idea resonate so deeply with the French public in the 1840s when this was actually published? What was the cultural nerve it was hitting?
That's a great question. You really have to look at the psychology of post-revolutionary France.
Okay, set the scene for us.
By the 1840s, the French people had been through absolute geopolitical whiplash. They had survived the Reign of Terror, where your neighbor might turn you into the guillotine. They survived the Napoleonic Wars, which wiped out an entire generation of young men. They saw emperors rise and kings return.
It was chaos.
The entire culture was suffused with paranoia, political machination, and betrayal. Nobody trusted anyone.
So into this exhausted, deeply cynical society drops the Three Musketeers.
Exactly. And Dumas offers them the ultimate escapist fantasy. But it's not a fantasy of magic or dragons.
No.
It's the fantasy of pure, unquestioning loyalty. A friendship where if you're in trouble, your friends don't ask for a geopolitical strategy. They just ask, what do you need? And they draw their swords.
That's powerful.
In a world where shifting alliances were the norm, the idea of an unbreakable bond was intoxicating to the reading public.
And it's deeply connected to Dumas' own ache, isn't it?
It really is.
There's a moment that just breaks my heart every time I think about it, especially in the context of his father.
Which moment?
D'Artagnan is feeling melancholy one evening, and he confesses to Athos that he never truly knew his father.
Oh, yes.
And Athos, who is the oldest and sort of the natural leader of the group, looks at him and says, "Then we are your fathers now."
It's an incredibly profound line. Then we are your fathers now.
It speaks to that desperate hope that a chosen family can heal the wounds inflicted by history.
Yeah.
The world told young Alexandre Dumas that he didn't have a father worth remembering. So he created a surrogate family on the page that could adopt him, protect him, and validate him.
So the found family isn't just a literary trope here.
Not at all. It's a survival mechanism.
It makes the swashbuckling adventure feel so much heavier. But speaking of the adventure, I think we need to get into the weeds of what actually happens in this book.
Let's do it.
So to you listening, this is your official spoiler warning. We are about to discuss the major twists, the traps, and the surprisingly grim ending of a 180-year-old novel.
Consider yourself warned. Exactly. So if you want to experience it totally fresh, maybe skip ahead a bit. But for the rest of us, what is the actual mission they go on?
Well, the overarching plot is driven by high-stakes court politics.
Okay.
The Queen of France, Anne of Austria, is having a secret affair with the Duke of Buckingham.
Right.
And he happens to be the Prime Minister of England, which makes this not just a scandal, but potential treason.
Huge stakes.
The true power operating behind the French king is Cardinal Richelieu. He's a master statesman who desperately wants to expose the Queen, ruin her reputation, and secure his total dominance over the court.
I always found Richelieu's trap to be brilliantly petty.
Oh, it really is.
Not an assassination attempt. It's basically a wardrobe malfunction. Can you explain how he actually plans to catch her?
It's a political checkmate.
Yeah.
So the Queen, in a moment of romantic foolishness, gifted the Duke of Buckingham 12 diamond studs.
Okay.
The problem is those studs were originally a gift to her from the King of France.
Oh.
Right. And Richelieu's spies find out about this. So Richelieu casually suggests to the king that he should throw a grand ball, and he insists that he ask the Queen to wear those specific diamond studs.
knowing full well they are currently across the English Channel.
Exactly.
It's so devious, because if she shows up without them, the king asks where they are, the affair is exposed, and she is entirely destroyed.
Yep.
So the queen is in an absolute panic, and her loyal seamstress, Constance, who D'Artagnan happens to be hopelessly in love with, recruits the Musketeers to pull off what is essentially an impossible heist in reverse.
Reverse heist.
They have to travel across France, cross the Channel, find the most powerful man in England, get the diamonds, and get back before the music starts at the ball.
And this journey is where Dumas' structural genius really shines. It's essentially a brutal gauntlet.
How so?
Well, Richelieu knows they're coming, and he sets ambushes all along the route. What's fascinating is that Dumas doesn't let the team succeed together.
Right, which is unusual.
Very. In almost any modern blockbuster, the whole team makes it to the final battle together. But Dumas strips them away, one by one.
It's so tense. Tell us how they fall, because it really isolates D'Artagnan in a terrifying way.
First, they stop at a tavern, and Athos gets drawn into a violent brawl with Richelieu's agents. He is severely wounded.
Okay.
But instead of letting it slow the whole group down, he locks himself in the tavern cellar with his sword and a lot of wine and tells the others to just leave him behind.
He sacrifices himself.
He actively sacrifices himself to buy them a few miles of lead time.
And then Porthos.
Porthos's downfall is his pride. They are confronted by another agent who insults Porthos's honor.
And Porthos can't ignore that.
Porthos is entirely unable to walk away from a slight, so he gets trapped in a duel that he simply cannot escape quickly, so he too is left behind.
Then it's just Aramis and D'Artagnan.
Right.
Yeah.
And Aramis is ambushed not by a sword, but by his own weaknesses.
Interesting.
He is wounded in an ambush and then essentially seduced and delayed by a woman who is secretly working for the cardinal. He suffers a crisis of faith and romance, which paralyzes him in a provincial town.
Which leaves the teenager.
Just him.
The youngest, the least experienced, riding completely alone through enemy territory. He's exhausted, his horse is dead, he is terrified, but he absolutely refuses to quit.
He pushes through.
He fights his way to the coast, crosses to England, forces his way into Buckingham's palace, gets the diamonds, and rides back just as the ball is beginning.
And it works.
The queen walks out wearing the studs, and Richelieu's entire geopolitical trap just shatters.
It's a massive victory. They trusted this provincial kid to finish what they started, and he didn't let them down. It fully cements his place as a true musketeer.
Yeah.
But as thrilling as that victory is, Dumas doesn't let them enjoy it for long.
No, he really doesn't.
This is where the story takes a very dark turn, and it centers entirely on Richelieu's top agent, Milady de Winter.
Milady de Winter. She might be one of the most incredible villains in all of literature.
She really is.
She's not just scary, she's incredibly complex. But wait, before we get into what she does, she has a secret history with one of our heroes, right?
Horrifying history. We learned that years ago, Athos, the noble, melancholy leader, was a wealthy, idealistic young nobleman. He fell madly in love with a beautiful young woman with no family and married her.
Okay.
He thought she was an angel. But one day, she was thrown from a horse and fell unconscious. When Athos cut open her dress to help her breathe, he saw something burned into her shoulder.
The brand.
It was the fleur-de-lis.
Which means she was a branded criminal. It was the mark of a thief or a murderer in French society.
Exactly. The realization that his entire marriage was a lie, that his wife was a convicted felon who had tricked him, it broke something fundamental inside Athos.
I can imagine.
Under the feudal laws of the time, he had the power of high justice on his lands. In a fit of absolute heartbroken rage, he tied her hands and hanged her from a tree in the forest, leaving her for dead.
Which is just chilling. Our supposed hero committed a brutal extrajudicial execution.
But she didn't die.
She survived.
She survived the hanging. That branded, traumatized, ruthless woman rose from the dead to become Milady de Winter, and she is now Richelieu's deadliest weapon.
I want to push back on the idea of her just being a villain for a second.
Sure.
Is it fair to just call her evil? Because when you look at her actions, yes, they are horrific, but the psychology behind her seems much deeper than a cartoon bad guy.
Oh, definitely. That is exactly why she is a masterpiece of characterization. She completely transcends simple villainy.
Not so.
You have to view her through the lens of a deeply patriarchal, oppressive society. She is a woman who learned very early on that the world offered women absolutely no power.
Right.
The only weapons she was allowed to wield were her beauty, her intellect, and her cunning. And once she realized that was the hand she was dealt, she decided to play it without a single ounce of mercy.
She refuses to be a victim again. If the world is going to brand her a monster, she's going to be the most terrifying monster in the room. She doesn't use brute force. She uses surgical intelligence.
She studies people.
Right, she finds the cracks in their armor and she breaks them from the inside.
Absolutely. And when D'Artagnan crosses her, she unleashes a vendetta that drives the entire second half of the novel into incredibly grim territory.
It gets so dark.
She manipulates a Puritan zealot into assassinating the Duke of Buckingham. But her most devastating act is personal. She infiltrates a convent where Constance D'Artagnan's great love is hiding.
And she murders her.
Yes!
She poisons her right before D'Artagnan can rescue her. Constance literally dies in his arms. It's such a shocking tonal shift from the fun, swashbuckling adventure of the first half.
It's a crucial thematic shift. It's the moment our young, reckless hero realizes that actions have permanent consequences. You can't sword fight your way out of grief.
No, you can't.
The climax of the novel is not a glorious battlefield charge. It is a dark, grim hunt. The Musketeers track Milady down in the dead of night. They hold a makeshift trial by a river, recount her crimes, and they hire an executioner to behead her.
It's incredibly bleak. They win, but the cost is just devastating. You're scarred, tired, and traumatized.
Yeah.
It really elevates the book from a simple romp into a story about survival and the heavy price of duty.
It really does.
But how on earth was Dumas churning out a story this complex with this much psychological depth on a daily basis? Because this wasn't published as a complete book at first.
Right. To understand the pacing and the explosive popularity, you have to understand the business model of the 1840s. The serialized novel, or feuilleton.
Feuilleton fever. Let's talk about that. How did it actually work?
Well, newspapers in Paris were highly competitive, and they realized that news alone didn't sell enough daily papers.
Okay.
But if you printed one chapter of a thrilling fiction story at the bottom of the front page every single day, readers became addicted.
I bet.
They would buy the paper tomorrow just to see what happened next. It was the 19th century equivalent of a Netflix binge, only you had to wait 24 hours for the next episode.
And Dumas was the undisputed king of this format. I mean, he practically invented the modern cliffhanger, didn't he?
He weaponized it. He understood pacing better than anyone alive. He would literally end a chapter in the middle of a sword swing.
No way.
Or right as a character gasped a shocking secret.
That's so frustrating.
You can imagine the absolute frustration of reading that over your morning coffee. You'd want to throw the paper across the room, but you would absolutely be first in line at the newsstand the next morning.
But this massive, unprecedented commercial success brought out the knives in the literary establishment.
Oh, they came for him.
The elites despise him. And I've always wondered about the controversy surrounding his writing process. People accused him of running a fiction factory and not even writing his own books.
Yes, that was a huge accusation.
Wasn't there a guy named Auguste Maquet who was involved? Is it fair to call Maquet a co-author?
That is the crux of the controversy right there. Yes, Auguste Maquet collaborated with Dumas. The demand for Dumas's work was so high that he couldn't possibly research and plot everything alone.
That makes sense.
So Maquet would do the historical research, he would draft the outlines, build the structural scaffolding of the plot, and provide the historical details.
So the critics latched onto that and said, Dumas is a fraud. Maquet is the real genius.
Exactly. They weaponized his collaborative process to diminish him. But if you look at the actual evidence, that argument falls apart completely.
Why is that?
First, Dumas never hid Maquet. And more importantly, when Maquet and his other collaborators tried to write and publish novels under their own names without Dumas, they failed miserably.
Really?
Their solo work was incredibly dry, lifeless, and structurally rigid.
It lacked the magic.
It lacked the soul. Dumas was the animating force. Maquet gave him a skeleton, but Dumas provided the blood, the muscle, and the heartbeat.
He brought it to life.
He wrote the crackling dialogue. He gave the characters their wit, their contradictions, their warmth. Dumas himself defended his process by comparing it to a Renaissance master's workshop.
How so?
He said, effectively, Michelangelo had assistants mixing his paints and prepping his canvases, but nobody doubts who painted the Sistine Chapel.
That is a brilliant defense. But it feels like the criticism wasn't really about his writing process at all.
No, it wasn't.
It feels like the Fiction Factory label was just a polite excuse to attack him for something much darker.
You hit the nail on the head. Beneath the literary snobbery was a vicious, undeniable current of racism.
Yeah.
The French literary establishment, which was very aristocratic and very white, simply refused to stomach the idea that a man with African blood, the grandson of an enslaved woman, could be the most celebrated, famous, and wealthy writer in all of France.
They just couldn't handle it.
They wanted to categorize him as a mere showman or an entertainer, refusing to grant him the prestigious title of an artist.
They couldn't stand that he beat them at their own game.
Yeah.
And you can see his defiance not just in his success, but in his personal life. He didn't shrink away from the criticism. He lived larger than life.
He was a total force of nature. He was tall, flamboyant, and had this booming, infectious laugh.
I read he spent his money incredibly fast.
Oh, with astonishing speed. When he made his fortune, he built a massive, lavish estate called the Château de Monte Cristo. He hosted endless parties, entertained multiple mistresses, and lived with an excess that scandalized conservative society.
He basically treated his own life like it was one of his adventure novels.
Pretty much.
There's a detail about his writing process that I just love. He didn't sit quietly at a desk in a dusty library.
No, not his style.
He would dictate to his assistants while physically pacing around his study, gesturing wildly, actually acting out the sword fights and delivering the passionate declarations of love at the top of his lungs.
He fully inhabited the world he was creating, and that's why he didn't care about strict historical accuracy.
Right.
Critics pointed out that the real D'Artagnan lived decades after the events of the novel, or that the real Cardinal Richelieu was a complex statesman, not a scheming, mustache-twirling villain.
And how did he respond to that?
Dumas's response was famously flippant. He joked that he bent history to serve his stories, creating beautiful children from the past.
He prioritized emotional truth over historical fact. He knew that the public didn't want a dry history lesson. They wanted heroes they could feel in their bones.
Exactly.
But let's fast forward, because the tension between the public's love for the book and the establishment's hatred for the man led to a really bizarre, almost tragic aftermath. How was Dumas treated after he died?
For over a century after his death in 1870, France engaged in a massive act of cultural cognitive dissonance.
What do you mean?
They absolutely loved the Three Musketeers. They celebrated the text, adapted it, and taught it, but they actively ignored and erased the man who wrote it.
How do you celebrate a book while erasing the author?
By sanitizing his image. Official portraits and textbooks would often crop his photographs to hide his African features.
That's awful.
They would discuss his literary output, but completely omit the story of his Haitian-born father. They wanted the sheer genius of the cultural export, but they refused to acknowledge the Black ancestry of the author or the profound systemic struggles his family faced.
It's a direct continuation of what Napoleon did to his father.
Exactly.
Napoleon erased the general, and the literary establishment erased the author. A century of deliberate omission.
But history has a way of correcting itself, even if it takes 130 years.
Which brings us to 2002.
Yes. 2002 is one of the most moving historical reckonings I've ever researched.
This gives me absolute chills.
Hey.
In 2002, the French government finally decided to right this historic wrong.
They did.
They exhumed Dumas' remains from his hometown to relocate him to the Pantheon in Paris. For those who might not know, the Pantheon is the ultimate secular temple of the French Republic.
It's a huge deal.
It is the resting place for their absolute greatest national heroes, Voltaire, Rousseau, Victor Hugo, and finally, Alexandre Dumas.
The ceremony itself was incredibly powerful. The state didn't just quietly move him. They threw a massive theatrical celebration worthy of the man himself.
I saw pictures of it.
His coffin was carried through the streets of Paris by the Republican Guard, but they weren't in their modern dress uniforms. They were dressed in the full, plumed hats and cloaks of the Musketeers.
And his coffin was draped in blue velvet, richly embroidered in silver with that immortal motto, all for one for all.
It was beautiful.
But what really strikes me is the speech given by President Jacques Chirac. He didn't mince words.
No, he didn't. He stood before the nation and explicitly acknowledged the racism and the historical injustice that Dumas had suffered.
He apologized.
He apologized for the Republic's failure to recognize him simply because of the color of his skin, and then he delivered a line that I think perfectly encapsulates Dumas' legacy. President Chirac said, "With you, we were all musketeers."
With you, we were all musketeers. It's a staggering admission from the head of state.
It really is.
It's an acknowledgement that this mixed-race outsider, the son of a deliberately forgotten hero, a man dismissed as a lowbrow hack by the elites, had given the nation a gift so universally powerful that it defined their national spirit.
He made everyone believe they could be heroes. Not just the aristocrats, but all of us.
That ceremony was France finally clinging all of Alexandre Dumas. Not just his talent, but his full identity.
It was the ultimate victory over the empire that tried to bury his family.
And that victory is still echoing today. When we look at the adaptations and the influence of this story, it is mind-boggling.
It's unprecedented, really.
The Three Musketeers has never gone out of print. It has been adapted into hundreds of plays, silent films, blockbuster movies, television series, comic books, anime, and video games.
The characters of D'Artagnan, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis are infinitely more famous globally than any real historical figure from 17th century France.
Which is saying something.
But why? Why does this specific story continue to get remade every single decade?
I think it's because the core fantasy he created is a universal blueprint.
How do you mean?
The idea that a young person with no money, no connections, and nothing but raw ambition and the loyalty of a few good friends can literally change the destiny of a nation that is the DNA of modern storytelling.
Oh, absolutely.
If you look at Star Wars, if you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, if you look at Lord of the Rings, they are all operating on the foundational structure that Dumas perfected. The ragtag found family standing against the corrupt empire.
And when you analyze that trope through the lens of Dumas' biography, it fundamentally transforms the way you read the book. This is one of the key takeaways from our deep dive today.
Yeah, share that.
When you pick up The Three Musketeers, knowing it's not just a commercial thriller, but a son's desperate, brilliant love letter to his erased, mixed-race father, it hits entirely differently.
It turns a swashbuckling romp into an act of profound historical defiance. It makes the sword fights feel like they carry the weight of real justice.
Exactly, and it speaks volumes about the power of representation and marginalization in art. Dumas looked at a society that explicitly told him he didn't belong, that his bloodline was a stain.
Right.
And his response wasn't just anger. His response was to write a story about belonging that was so undeniably powerful, so infectious, that it forced the society that rejected him to adopt his characters as their own.
He proved that true, enduring greatness so often comes from the margins. He wrote for everyone who has ever been told they don't matter, proving that talent and imagination can completely transcend prejudice.
Wonderfully said.
Which leads me to a question I want to throw out to you listening right now. Think about your own life and the media you consume. What is a story, a book, or a movie that helped you feel seen or gave you a sense of belonging when the world made you feel like an outsider? We would genuinely love for you to share your answer in the comments because that is the true magic of what Dumas achieved.
Before we wrap up, we should definitely touch on a few fun extras from his life because his relationship with his audience is just too legendary to ignore.
Oh, definitely.
We mentioned the riot earlier when readers protested a character's death.
Oh, the balcony quote.
Yeah.
This is perhaps my favorite anecdote about him.
It's so good.
So the readers are literally rioting in the streets outside the newspaper office because a beloved character dies in the serial. Dumas hears the commotion, steps out onto his balcony overlooking the angry mob.
Yeah.
He looks down at them, gives a deep theatrical bow, and shouts, "I am not God. I cannot resurrect the gone."
And the crowd actually booed him. They were furious. But Dumas understood human psychology and the absolute power of emotional investment.
He knew what he was doing.
He knew that their anger meant they cared deeply. And sure enough, the very next day, the newspaper sales completely doubled. He knew exactly how to play the audience.
But his life wasn't just a series of triumphs. We get a glimpse of his final years, and they are quite bittersweet.
They are.
He made millions, but he died with almost nothing. He spent his life giving away his massive fortune. He supported struggling artists, he housed friends who never paid him back, and he refused to manage his finances with any kind of discipline.
He was incredibly generous.
He believed in living life to the absolute fullest, with the same reckless generosity as his musketeers.
The cost of that generosity was bankruptcy. He was forced to sell his beloved Chateau de Monte Cristo. He had to flee his creditors, and he eventually passed away in 1870 in Belgium at the age of 68.
But from home.
He died far away from the Parisian glory he once ruled.
He died bankrupt in exile.
Mm.
But, as we've discussed today, he left behind a legacy that was vastly richer than the treasury of any king. He secured immortality for himself, for his iconic characters, and ultimately, he resurrected the memory of his father.
Which leaves us with the final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
180 years ago, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the most powerful men to ever walk the earth, used the full crushing weight of his empire to try and erase a black general from the pages of history.
Yeah.
Today, Napoleon's empire is gone, but that general's son rests in the pantheon among France's greatest heroes, wrapped in a motto that defines the very concept of brotherhood for the entire world.
It is the ultimate proof that while politicians and empires can rewrite history in the short term, a truly great story will always eventually outlive the empire. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep questioning the stories you read, to always seek out the voices on the margins, and to remember, all for one and one for all.